Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Tiger Mining Report podcast here on the Believe Network, part of a new network we're a part of with, of course, the Motor City Metrics podcast that we have on there. So, a lot of great podcasts you can find on there. Anything from the Green Bay Packers, Detroit Lions, whatever you're interested in, the Believe Network has you. So, you can follow the link on our description and you can check out the other podcasts if you're interested and check out whatever else you're interested in. That's not redundant, but honestly, there's something for everyone. Literally over 500 podcasts, and being part of the Believe Network, we have a couple things we have to take care of, some housekeeping items, and we wanted to remind you that BetOnline remains your top spot for all your live betting and action and contests from the NFL, college football, UFC, NHL are all going on right now. Ton of betting action. BetOnline is your number one source for wager news, odds, trends, and predictions. All the hoops action, betting action, along with every sport available at your fingertips with both the desktop and mobile access at any time. Head to BetOnline today and remember to use our promo code BELIEVE, BLEAV, for your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. Again, use the promo code BELIEVE, BLEAV, for your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. BetOnline, where the game starts. So that being said, we got that housekeeping item out of the way. On to the show. And Chris just finished a great work with the tool series, the best power tool in the system. And Chris, this was a lot of fun to do because there's actual power in the system.
Yeah, I mean, that was kind of the my lengthy preamble to that piece was, we mentioned it with Jason Beck last week too, was the change in overall power throughout the system over the last 3 or 4 years. And the way I wrote about it was in 2019, Tigers had, I think, 3 guys hit more than 15 home runs, or maybe it was 4 or 5, I don't remember exactly, but none of them were actually prospects. And they had, I wanna say a total of 13, 20 home run seasons in that decade, 2010 to 2019, and they've had 15 in the last 3 years, and almost all of them are pretty good prospects. And so last year, they just had 3 20 home run hitters, but they're all promising, and there are a handful of other guys who look like they could get there. So, yeah, it was a fun list to put together. There wasn't a I mean, there's a little bit of, internal debate about who should be number 1 in the system because Jace Jung hit 28 home runs and Colt Keith hit 27, but I put Colt Keith first overall. And part of that is just because of Colt Keith's ability to hit makes me think he's going to get to more of the power a little bit. And also, Keith had like 10, 12 more doubles than Jace Young did, and so I'm taking that into account. That's maybe some of those doubles will become home runs in time, or maybe he'll just always have a higher slugging percentage because there's more extra base hits there. So, what was the thinking there?
No, and it's a solid way to think about it too. Also, the fact that yeah, did you one of the things we did factor into it was the levels too. I mean, here
Yeah,
we
and
are. Look,
age.
yeah, and age, yeah, and that's another thing too. That was something that you discovered, and I believe you mentioned this on the Motor City Metrics podcast. The one of the most fascinating things about the minor leagues, and I've been doing some research, looking into when I did the original. I did a list back in September of how many hitters hit 20 home runs, which was 3 this year, and it was unique only because they weren't journeymen and they weren't. And some of the things that are going across the system, another fascinating thing about this, Chris, is that everybody who had either 18 or more home runs was over the. I mean, Chris Myers and Justice Bigby's are outliners. They're 24, but no one was over the age of 25, like previously you saw in the past.
Yeah, when they had home run hitters in the previous decade, they were often minor league free agent types or older guys. Like Josh Lester wasn't a minor league free agent necessarily, but I think he was at one point. But he was 25, 26, 27 when he was hitting home runs. Other guys were like Danny Dorn and Gabriel Quintana and Mike Hessman and Brad Eldred. All these minor league guys just looking for a shot, and the guys are hitting home runs now in the last 3 or 4 years. It's Riley Green, it's Spencer Torkelson, it's Kerry Carpenter, it's Colt Keith, it's Jace Young, it's Parker Meadows, it's Justin Henry Malloy. Like these are all legit prospects. So it's a fun thing to see happening in the system. And the other thing I mentioned is and this is not relating to the minor league system, but Kerry Carpenter and Spencer Torkelson last year both hit 20 home runs for the Tigers. And they I think I had they were just the fifth and sixth homegrown hitters to hit with 20 plus home runs in a season for the Tigers. This, since 2000, it was Bobby Higginson hit 20 plus in 2000. Then you had Brandon Inge, you had Curtis Granderson and Nick Castellanos, and that's it until Carpenter and Torkelson both did it last year. So there are signs that the Tigers have, made some real progress in terms of developing power hitters, and I think the power list indicates that. Again, that there's nobody on there that's just a monster like Giancarlo Stanton, Aaron Judge, but there are a handful of guys who are going to hit 20 plus, which is it's certainly a start.
Yeah, and that's where you want to see. I mean, this is something that prior to this year, I mean, you talk about Brandon Dixon, just some of these names that across. It's been horrific. I mean, let's not mince any words here. It's just been where you think of these kind of journeyman names too on the big league side, outside of perhaps Nick Castellanos, really in the last decade, it's
Yeah.
really been slim when it comes to homegrown guys to at least hit 20 home runs, and that's not even asking for very much.
Yeah, and I'm trying to think. Yeah, Avi Garcia probably hit 20 plus in a season, but I don't think it was with it certainly wasn't with the Tigers. It was and I don't think McCann ever got quite to 20. Maybe he did once, but yeah, it's been even the guys who didn't do it in Detroit. Willie Adames I think has, but yeah, it's not been something the Tigers weren't really terribly good at developing anything, really. They had some success developing arms there for a good decade plus, but Um, yeah, the thing we were asking for forever was figuring out some hitters, and we're starting to see it. So yeah, and it's not just they were getting some guys in trades too. Jake Rogers came over in a trade. He's got some power. Justin Henry Malloy, who's number 3 on our list, hit 23 home runs. He's a guy who could probably hit more. As I mentioned in the article, we also broke down thanks to Jerry, collating all the Hawkeye and Statcast data. Malloy and Colt Keith have very similar max exit velocity and average exit velocity, and they're both kind of roughly big league average. The difference is that Malloy hits a few more balls on the ground, like 5% more, and he just doesn't swing as much. He walks a ton. So if he could, having an 18% walk rate is outstanding. If you bring that down to 14 or 15% and you're swinging at more balls you can drive, that's even better. So um, yeah, there's more power in the system there, and then we followed up with there's like a good 8 guys who could have taken, the final 2 in our top 5 or any of the honorable mentions, and so it'll be interesting to see who from that group breaks out next year.
Yeah, so we saw so number one, or so we can start from the top. Obviously, we've talked about the top three quite a bit, and I mean we can break it down a little bit more and go into something like, for example, let's start from the bottom a little bit too, because we can start from the honorable mentions and work our way up. And so for the future projection side of things, I did like your Clayton Campbell suggestion too. And Clayton Campbell is a guy who there's unfortunately not a lot of film on him because he was down in Lakeland. Hopefully they'll change next year. This was the New Zealander who played in the Australian League, and then the Tigers signed him, I believe, three years ago. And
Oh,
so
alright.
yeah, he was originally signed as a catcher, but see him as a first baseman, utility guy. He can play all over. But the number that stood out to me, Chris, was you said here he had 4 home runs and 18 doubles and just 146 at bats, which puts him at an ISO over 200, which is really good.
Yeah, I mean, he wasn't clearing the fence a ton, but it's not a huge sample, and yeah, he just was a doubles machine. Now Jeff Ponce, I think, put a 20 grade on his athleticism, which I don't know if that tells us much for the future for Clayton Campbell, but he felt like somebody worth mentioning because he doesn't, that was just an awful lot of production from a young guy in the system that doesn't get talked about a lot. So that's kind of what we want with that future projection area is just to give nod to some of the younger guys who might be worth knowing in the future.
Yeah, there was also, I mean, the Christian Santana, yeah, 12 home runs and is at bats, but I mean, he struggled all season at the plate. I mean, if he wasn't really
Yeah,
hitting home runs, he was either striking out or walking.
yeah, and that one was kind of tough because he basically spent his full second full season. I mean, it's had some injuries and stuff, but second full season in low A, and I don't know how much more projection you could put on him, but I think the power, the raw power is there. When he hits it, he really hits him far. But it's a question as to whether like he can alter his approach to actually hit enough for it to matter. And if he alters his approach, does that cut down on his power? That's something that remains to be seen. Still just kind of holding out hope there because he's so young. I think he just turned 20, maybe, or he's about to turn 20. So yeah, that was the hope there. And then the other one I think in the future projection was Josue Briseño, who I think we mentioned finished second in the complex league in slugging or OPS. I don't remember if it was one of those two. I want to say 7 home runs, but
Slugging, second best slugging percentage.
yeah. So he hits the ball hard. We've seen the Baseball America has relayed some of the underlying data that his 90th percentile exit velocity is very good and all that stuff. He doesn't swing and miss a ton. And then he bumped up to the Florida State League at the end of the year, and I don't think he hit a home run. He might have hit one, but I think he had 7 doubles in a really quick span. And again, so this power hitting, any extra base hits from guys like that, I count as power. He's not legging out triples. This is a guy who's hitting the ball hard into the gaps, and so he's one that's definitely gonna be fun to watch going forward.
Yeah, and there's a kind of a there was in terms of his swing too. We did get a little bit of video from his swing thanks to Sherry doing the legwork there down in Lakeland. So, but every time we got a swing, though, we didn't get any home runs or anything. But still, this guy was signed last January 2022, and so this is a guy who it looks. I mean, he is a big dude. I mean, you can see him here in this video if you're watching this on YouTube. Nice little swing. A single here to
Yeah.
drive in too.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't I mean, that's an opposite field hit, so it's not gonna look like a lot of bat speed. It doesn't necessarily show you like he's not, turning on a ball, but he's a big, strong guy, and you could see how he could he's got a chance to do some damage as he continues to go, and again, very young. I think he just turned 19.
Yeah, and for the Tigers, really, a guy like that too. You would normally see something like that in the outfield. Is that fair to say, Chris? I mean, usually with guys like this, that's kind of big.
Yeah, yeah, well, I mean, outfield, like a hulking first baseman type, and that may be what he ends up being, but that, they are pursuing developing him a catcher, which would be a pretty nice thing to have, a left-handed hitting catcher with power. So it is unusual.
Here's another opposite field single. That's all we have, unfortunately, on him. So I'm trying to pull it up right now, and yeah, this is another opposite field single right there. Little same thing as we saw last. This is in the playoffs against Clearwater.
Well, I mean, and the thing, he also made our hit list because I think he seems to be has pretty good feel for hitting. He doesn't strike out a lot. He walks a good amount. So there's a lot to like there offensively.
Yeah, I know we had Jeff Pontus on and was talking about how some of the scouts are saying these certain things, but again, he's still young, so anything could be possible. On the honorable mentions list, Eddie's Leonard really stood out because I mean when the Tigers got him from the Dodgers, this is a guy who was stored away on the Dodgers 40-man roster at AA Tulsa. His numbers did not look good. But you mentioned this earlier about people with age. He's pretty young and managed to be in Toledo okay. And he blasted 8 home runs, like you mentioned here, 10 doubles in 40 games, finishing the year with 19 home runs. But he led Toledo with a maximum exit velocity of 111.6.
Yeah, and again, that was I think he just kind of I know you were kind of pumping him up a little bit and excited to see him and I think he just kind of went under the radar because it was a an acquisition for cash, right? It wasn't like a big trade. It happened right when all the Eduardo Rodriguez stuff didn't happen. And yeah, it was just a short period of time, but like, as you said, 8 home runs in 40 games. It's nothing to sneeze at all. And in that period of time, he had the hardest exit velocity of anybody in Toledo all year. So it's a guy who hits the ball hard, and it'll be interesting to see what happens with him because he's also I think he might have just turned 23. He's young. He was productive. He plays multiple positions, and I don't think he's somebody you would necessarily think of as a big power hitter, but he might end up producing more than people expect.
Yeah, especially you just the only question remains is what position, which seems to be the theme with a lot of these guys lately. What position does he end up playing? Does he play? Scott Harrison has mentioned more in the outfield, but he came up as a shortstop and wasn't bad. I mean, he was serviceable. So among other names, Jose de la Cruz, which we seems like you almost forgot. I mean, let's be honest here. It seems like we've kind of forgotten about Jose de la Cruz because between injuries and everything, he has struggled. But Chris, it was good to see his name back up on the list.
Yeah, I felt like I had to put him on there. He hit, I think, 12 home runs last year. He did it while cutting his walk rate by about 7% or cutting his strikeout rate by 7% and increasing his walk rate. But it's still strikeout rate's still a little bit high. But at least according to our data, he had the hardest hit ball in the entire system last year. It was like 115.8 miles per hour or something like that. Like harder than anybody including on the Tigers. So he's a guy that we've always heard of, has unreal power, and it's there, so you gotta give him credit for that, and it's just a matter of finding ways to get to it more in games. But he made improvements last year, so you don't wanna write him off. It's one of those things, we hear about these guys when they sign at 16, and by the time they're 22, it feels like they're 40 years old because we've heard about him for 6, 7 years, but he's still really young, and so, yeah, he's one that's definitely worth watching next year.
Yeah, of all the bats that we were able to get in the postseason too, we actually managed to get his at bat, his home run against Clearwater, and I get and if I'm remembering this correctly, I think it was against the guy who has major league experience. Oh, that was just
Yeah, he
belted.
he got all of that.
Yeah,
It was not, a shock to anybody there.
yeah, that's a good shot right there. But like, I mean, if we're going back to it for just a second. Look at the looks like he's changed his little bit of his footing too, a little bit. But yeah,
Yeah,
that's a beautiful shot.
it's, y it's there were other players I could have put on this list too who also hit like Roberto Campos didn't make the honorable mention list, and he very well could have because he hits the ball extremely hard, and he's very young, and he's big, but he just the game production wasn't necessarily there this year, and I wanted to give a little bit more notice to other players, so De La Cruz is definitely one to keep an eye on.
And then Justice Bigby, which you don't really think about because of his hitting average. He led the minor league system in batting average, and you forget that he had 19 home runs.
Yeah, and he finally hit one in the Arizona Fall League on the final day. Yeah, it's like he hits the ball as hard, as consistently hard as anybody in the system. He hits the ball hard all the time. The only issue is that with the way his swing works is that he hits it hard up the middle and the opposite way, and it's usually a line drive. So I would bet at least half of his home runs went to the opposite field this year, which is really unusual. And I mean, it works for him. It's the only reason he's not higher is that it's hard to hit 20 plus home runs that way in big leagues or at higher levels when you're not pulling the ball enough. I wouldn't put it past him to start pulling the ball more and get that production, but that's just, maybe that'll be next year's list because we got to see it before I can say anything about it.
Yeah, and speaking of seeing it, by the way, I mean we did see a lot of him in Erie, and I'm rocking the black one today. Make sure you pick up the new Howling Dead Red hat that just went on sale yesterday over on the website. So it's in the front page of the Erie's website. So if you just go to the front page or just go to the Erie Seawolves website, it's right there. I'm just plugging it because these guys have done so much for us, and this is the least I can do. They were so accommodating to us all the time. So go to the Seawolves website, get the new Howling Dead collection, get the red cap. It looks sweet. And there's some other stuff in the works too. And of course, you won't, if you haven't gotten the pepperoni balls hat, that's also a sweet hat too. So, all right, enough plugging with that. But the other guy in Erie too that did a lot of damage down there before he went to Toledo was Dylan Dingler, who just got added to the 40 man, and he is one of those players, Chris. That and I think if this is something I picked up from you is how catchers develop. It is a system. It is no one can figure. It just seems like that happens all the time that they develop later. every time.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about, was it Jonah Heim in playoffs? Guys that really don't seem to produce at the big league level until their late 20s. And Jake Rogers was 28 this year, I think, right? That was um, he made a little noise as a 26-year-old in the big leagues, but didn't have his first good season until 28. And a lot of that is just there's so much demand on their defensive work and everything else that goes into the life of being a catcher that the bat sometimes is last. They're batting during games, but it's there's a lot going on. And we've seen Dingler have really hot stretches. We've seen Dingler look like a future big league regular, but as he continues to climb the ladder, and he kind of stagnated in Erie for a long time, and it's just he seems to have a swing that doesn't necessarily let him get to his power as much as he needs to for it to work. But it's certainly in there. He's got a lot of power. He hit I don't know how many home runs last year, 15, 16 in like 80 games, something like that. So it's in there. He just
Here's the
needs
pitch.
to figure.
There's
Oh, there's a
a fly ball drilled to left. Back is
Yeah, that's the game where Toledo scored
yeah.
24 runs, maybe, I think.
That's a Dingler homering on
Yeah.
an eephus pitch. Unfortunately, I think that may have been his only home run in Toledo. It might have had one more. I don't know.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's he's going to need more time in Toledo, and the defensive skills are there, so he's going to get some time, and the raw power is there. It's just figuring out a way to get to it, but there's no denying that it's in there.
Yeah, and the biggest thing too is to work on. A lot of teams have figured out that he swings a lot of sliders away. I mean, they've been attacking him quite a bit, and so if he can lay off that for next year and cut down the strike rate just a little bit, that'll definitely help out his cause. And with the Tigers,
Yeah,
the way it is right now.
yeah, and beyond that, it would look to me like he would pick up that teams were doing that. But then they could throw fastballs right by him because he was trying to sit on that slider or something like that. So yeah, the hit tool isn't quite there to get to that power, but everybody can cross your fingers and hope. He's on the 40 man, so yeah, that's something. We'll see.
It definitely exists. I mean, there's a prime example of the magnitude of his power, and to me, this is an example of what we're talking about here. In against Harrisburg, this was back, I believe, in the middle of the season, and I just think he was just coming back to the lineup for Erie because he was coming back from injury, and this is 411 feet. I mean, this is a blast out in
Yeah, the
Harrisburg.
dead center.
Yeah, dead center.
Yeah,
And
when
that's it.
he hits him hard.
Yeah, it's another example of that too. So if you're watching us on YouTube, yeah, Dingler, there's something to be said about it. And so I know Tiger fans expect a little more this year, but we'll see what happens. And then you put Isaac Pacheco on there, and Pacheco's season, I know to some fans, he dropped a lot of prospect lists. He dropped on ours, but again, outside of Lansing, where he loves apparently he loves Lansing a lot. The power just was not consistent at all this year.
Yeah, and he had a nice uptick there in like the final 4 weeks of the season, but at that point it was kind of too little, too late. But we've seen him. He's just got a ton of raw power. We were there for I saw him hit a 450-foot home run in Lansing. That and a lot of guys in the system who could say that they can go 450 plus. Um, it's a ton of raw power, and he's just another guy who's going to probably need another full season in high A to untap his hitting ability if he can and get to that power.
And a guy who has to get to his power, speaking of which, and this is where it was kind of indicative that Brian Payne was upset that he lost his player. That was Brady Allen, and he goes the next on the list and he goes to number 5. And he had a really strong finish to the year at West Michigan before he got called up to Erie. And originally, the Tigers really, to me, I thought signed him, or I think they traded for him because of the offensive liabilities they had in the outfield at West Michigan. And he provided to be a little more than that as the season went on, Chris. He was really the straw that stirred the drink for the Whitecaps.
Yeah, and he's another guy who he has like pretty easy plus raw power, but the approach leads to a little bit more ground balls and line drives than is ideal. But he's a guy who, like Bigby, was hitting a lot of opposite field home runs. That's what you just saw in the video, is him going way out to right field. So the power's there. It's just, as with a lot of these guys, it's figuring out a way to get to it a little bit more consistently. But in Allen's case, he walks a fair amount. He didn't hit for a ton of average, but he's, as you mentioned, he's a very good defender in the corners, and he can even handle center a little bit. So there's a lot to like there. But the power is legit. If he can, I think he hit 7 or 8 home runs total for the Marlins in the Marlins system before the trade, and he ended up with 19 total this year, I think. 1 in Erie, and then 3 in Beloit, and 16 in West Michigan, or 15 in West Michigan. So yeah, he's a guy who could hit 20 plus next year. It's just a matter of how he handles the move to AA.
Yeah, so take that, Dave Myers. It's because Dave Myers went to the Marlins.
Oh yeah, gotcha.
Yeah. Sorry, that was a bad joke there.
Take that Marlins.
That Marlins. Take that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So number 4 comes in is at Chris Myers. And we saw a lot of Chris Myers this year, and Erie came up big for Erie a couple times, clutch. And I got to give props to him as well, because he moved to the outfield for the first time. He played left. It was a little bit of an adjustment, but he played out pretty well. Defensively, he could hold his own at first, but the power, when he got a hold of one, it was just like a big lumbering shot. And I like the evolution of him so far, because he continues to, you think when he's down and out, when he's struggling a little bit, he comes up, and this is in the postseason right here. This was a monster shot when Erie needed him the most. And that's, to me, what stood out to me the most is that he came out, he had a slow start in Erie, but then he started coming on the last month of the season.
Yeah, I mean, that was what I mentioned in the piece too, is that he tore up West Michigan, to the point where they had to promote him because it was getting ridiculous. He's hitting like 330 plus with a bunch of power. And then he got to Erie, and it was a bit of a struggle for him. I think he had 1 home run in his first 29 games, and then he hit 8 home runs over his final 40 games. So he figured it out. And you saw in that playoffs, he had that 2-homer game. So there's definitely above average to plus raw power in his bat, probably plus, if not better, actually. But like so many of these guys, it's figuring out ways to get to it when you need to all the time. I still don't quite know if it's going to work. It's always tough with first baseman. As you mentioned, he did play some left field and was solid out there. So they wanted to get him moving around, because I think they do believe in the bat a little bit. And I just don't know if it's enough bat to be a big leaguer, or big league, been decent amount of time in the big leagues, or if he's going to be more like Josh Lester, who's a big time minor league slugger, and maybe eventually gets up to the big leagues for a little bit. But either way, it's a good guy to have in the system, and I think he'll be productive in the upper minors for at least another year or two.
Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with that kind of projection too, especially when you see guys like number 3, Justin Malloy, get a call up, and he was the third, and as you mentioned in the piece, third Tiger minor leaguer who hit 20 plus home runs in 2023. He had 23 in 135 games. And Chris, I like what you said here. He could probably hit 25 or more with the minor adjustments to his approach. And you mentioned that earlier. So my question to you when it comes to that is too, in a sense that, do you believe when a player is playing a certain position, they develop a certain rhythm? And does that play a cadence into Malloy? Because, I mean, keep in mind that he was playing the outfield, playing third. So in terms of consistency, that might have thrown off his game a little bit on the offensive side. I don't know if you believe in that or not, but
I mean, I think it's possible it's certainly possible for players to take something from the field to the batter's box, or from the batter's box to the field, that they're thinking about or worried about. And that may have played a role for Malloy. I don't know. Some guys don't seem to care about anything and just go out there and try to hit. But he seemed like a pretty thoughtful kid, and so maybe it's something that affected him. But I didn't even look to see what his splits are in terms of hitting position. I don't know if we can, but that would be kind of fascinating. But yeah, he's definitely a guy with 25 home run power in his bat. It's just a matter of, and it may not ever come out that way just because of the way he hits. He uses the whole field. He has learned to pull the ball more, I think, this year, and pull it in the air, which is key for hitting home runs. So he might keep flashing that power, but I don't think he's ever going to be like a 30 home run power guy. But 20 with a bunch of on base is just fine.
Yeah, I could see him being also a good gap hitter at Comerica Park, especially perhaps left
Yeah.
center when he gets get a hold of one. But yeah, this is where see sometimes he looked a little overmatched sometimes early on in the seats, but I think that started happening less. But this is what a lot of we were seeing there, where there was a lot of grounders and obviously some really crappy play there.
Is this the call 'em up series? What is this?
Yeah, this call 'em up series. Yeah,
Gotcha.
and
Yeah.
go ahead.
No, I think you're right. It was, he had a couple months of struggling, but there you see right there that ball right there, lifting and pulling to the, it's just a good way to hit home runs, and that was 97 miles an hour according to the scoreboard, and he absolutely turned on it. So it's in there. It's just a matter of doing that a little bit more often.
Yeah, and I think the reason why I was mentioning the position side of things is because I still am convinced that he still doesn't have a set position. So we'll see what happens here as the season goes on, or when the season starts, where they're going to put him exactly. Number two, we mentioned Jace Jung slugged 647 in his college career, which I totally forgot about there, Chris. But we're mentioning he's just one of two minor leaguers with a fly ball rate above 45 and a pull rate above 51.
Yeah, so that's something that's one of those things that I didn't really notice, seeing him at the park. We probably saw him 6 to 10 times at live last year. And we saw him also the year before, and the year before it was kind of noticeable how often he was hitting these kind of soft fly balls to left field, but he really figured out how to turn on the ball this year to an extreme level, and not just turn on it, but also turn it on it in the air. And that's not to say that he can't hit home runs to center or left field. He does, and in the video that I just uploaded of all 28 of his home runs, you'll see some of those. But yeah, he's developed a very extreme pull approach in the air, and that, as I mentioned, the only other guy in the minors who did that with that many plate appearances was Relvis Martinez, who also hit 20 home runs. And in the big leagues, there were 4 guys who did it. Now, there are a bunch that didn't qualify, but the 4 qualified players were Isaac Paredes, Kyle Schwarber, Cal Raleigh, and I'm blanking on the 4th one. Why am I blanking on the 4th one? But in any event, it was the four guys in the big leagues who did it combined to hit 144 home runs last year, an average of 36 apiece. And they also combined to hit 222. It's not necessarily an approach that leads to a ton of batting average, but if you're going to walk and you're going to hit home runs, most people don't care all that much. So um, it'll be fascinating to see if he continues that AAA and on into the big leagues. And one of the big things that I noticed through the course of the year, and you could see this in the video, sort of, is when we went and saw him at the beginning of the year, he was getting blown away by pedestrian fastballs, like 92, 93, just right by him. And by the end of the year, he's turning around 96, 97 with ease. So I don't know if he made some adjustments or if that was just getting warmed up. But one of my concerns early on was that he couldn't handle velocity, and he certainly proved that wrong over the course of the year. I think he even got a hit off Paul Skeens, I believe, late in season.
Yes, he did. Yeah, that was the battle of he was the only one that did not look overmatched against Paul Skeens, and that was interesting watching that live. He moseyed down Trey Cruz pretty easily, but the first at bat, I think Jung struck out, but I think or maybe he drew a walk. I can't remember, but that was both at bats were very lengthy, and Jung did a really good job of just taking the ball and smoking it up the middle too. It was a hard hit ball. So yeah, to me, there's the one thing about Jung that I'm really fascinated by what he's going to do next year is where they're going to put him in position wise, because he did see some time at third base in the Arizona Fall League. But overall, I'd like to see him too just continue to get that batting average up a little bit. I think that he's totally capable of that.
No, and he did. He raised it when he moved up a level, which is not something you see a ton,
Yeah.
although it's something that we predicted just because of the change in ballparks. Yeah, I mean, he goes out and wins a Gold Glove as a minor league second baseman, and the Tigers have him playing third base in the Arizona Fall League, which is not, that's fine, right?
Yeah.
And that's the thing is like, we saw him a ton, as I said, and on defense, he looks really good. But it's a different kind. It's a very steady, good hands, uh, accurate throws. If he can get to the ball, he's going to make the play. The issue is he just doesn't have the much range. And there's nothing you can do about that. It's the way his body works. He's not a quick twitch athlete. He's got the big hips and thighs. And so you may eventually, if he gets and plays a full season in the big leagues, he might be a guy who makes 1 or 2 errors a year, like really good, solid, steady fielder, but still rates out as like a -5 outs above average because he's just not getting to everything that other defenders are. But um, yeah, I mean, he's looking like a pretty well-rounded player at this point. He's not gonna steal a bunch of bases for you or anything like that, but I don't think he's gonna be a huge drain on the defense, which is the way, what we once feared.
Yeah, and no, you're right, because one of the things he prided himself on, and he was getting really frustrated with people, rightfully so, was about his defense. And he went out. He also was among the highest rated second baseman according to Baseball America at second base. And so I thought he kind of quieted his critics a little bit with that, because that was something that was ongoing, which again, I was kind of miffed by that too, because I thought he was serviceable. I didn't see anything like Wenzel Perez where he couldn't have the yips or anything like that. But um, his range, I see what people are talking about, but I thought his range was fine.
He strikes me as the classic kind of gamer type where like you put him in the game and he's just gonna play and he's gonna make the plays that he can. And I don't think you have to worry about him a ton. It's just how it all works out with him and Malloy and the number one guy on our list, Colt Keith, about where are they going to find places for these guys and where can they all play defense at the big league level? It still remains to be seen, but they're 3 pretty interesting bets for sure.
And here's the Salamento one too. I forgot about Salamento because he's so all arms when you see him pitch,
funky,
and that was just his funky delivery. So I don't know. It's worth seeing that again. And
Yeah, and
go ahead.
but the only other thing I was going to say is just from putting all these videos together, like just going and grabbing each home run and putting them into one video. I hadn't quite realized how. I don't necessarily want to say streaky because all power hitters are nobody hits a home run every day. But I think Jung had 5 different games where he hit 2 home runs, and toward the end of the year, he had a 5 home run stretch in 3 games against Somerset. So he might just be one of those guys who hits home runs in bunches, at Williams too, which is fine, right?
Yeah.
It seems to happen to a lot of people. So
Yeah, and this is something that, I mean, if we're being honest here, we're not used to having Tiger prospects, infield prospects with power. I mean, if you in the grand scheme of things, I mean, you think about Scott Sizemore, you think about even Suarez didn't flash that kind of power when he was in the minors. So I don't want to hear anybody say that. Well, what about Suarez? I mean, the power was there, but they
wouldn't have traded him if they wouldn't have traded him if they knew he was going to hit 40 home runs in the big leagues. Yeah. So and then that segues into Colt Keith pretty well, I think. Whereas another potential probable infielder, third base, second base, we don't know. He played both of them last year, but yeah, he's almost as productive in games. I mean, it just depends on how you define it, right? He had one fewer home run than Jace Jung, but had many more doubles in roughly the same amount of plate appearances at generally a higher level at a younger age. And also, he's a better pure hitter, and we saw the top end of what he can do, which included a 473-foot home run, which was we don't know for sure, but I'm going to go out on a limb and say that was the longest home run that anybody in the entire system hit last year, because that's an absolute wow. And that's the sort of thing that Colt Keith is capable of. And Jace Jung can hit him pretty far away. I think one of his home runs there in Somerset was almost 440 feet. But I think 30 feet on top of that is just a different ball game, and that's what is possible with Colt Keith. So that's why he made it number 1. Just a combination of the raw power, the production, and the hitting ability.
Yeah, and he's the number 1 prospect for a reason for that, and it's just continue to put for his age too, Chris. I mean, this is a guy who is just 22 now.
Yeah, I believe so. He was 20. Was he 22? Yeah, I don't know. I'm trying to think because he was a 2020 draft pick as an 18-year-old, so 3 years, but he may have been 19 like shortly after, so he probably just turned 22.
Yeah. And those are the kind of bats you see here where it's, even if he does get kind of, and I mentioned this in the hit series too, there's not a stretch where Colt Keith, he might have like a rough stretch, but once he made an adjustment, once he figured out how to position his hands better, whatever he had to do, you saw it pretty quick. And I mean, the see, like that, the opposite field hit that you're watching here on YouTube, but when he got a hold of one, I mean, holy crap, just majestic. I mean, just I remember I think it was in Columbus, like that. I couldn't find that home run off really quick, but yeah,
Yeah,
what he was
show you
doing,
on
what he was
Twitter,
doing,
but not.
oh, not yet on Twitter. Yeah, there's in the 6-for-6 game, Chris. I mean, that was a game that, again, where you saw the power and hitting tool on display.
Yeah, he had 2 home runs to the pole field, hit a triple down the right field line, and almost hit a 3rd home run to left field. It was off the top of the wall. That's how he got his double in that 6-for-6 cycle game. So, yeah, he's a guy who'll drive the ball out to all parts of the field. Yeah, just a pretty complete hitter. You know, he doesn't walk at an obscene amount, but he's not gonna swing and miss or chase a ton. And if they throw him strikes, he's gonna hit the ball hard. So, yeah,
Yeah,
I would, if I were to pick another Tigers player to, be a homegrown 20 home run hitter, I would go with Colt Keith.
yeah, 473-foot shot. I found the home run here in Toledo.
Yeah.
And this is the one I was talking about in Columbus. That was just a monster shot. And this is where people are talking about, well, we should trade for Jonathan India. I don't think so. This is a big reason why you don't trade your prospect for something like what he was able to do here. Just, I mean, that was a bad breaking ball in the first place, but went out to the street. It almost hit a car. Didn't he hit a car?
The announcer said he almost caused a car accident because it landed in the intersection.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's, it that's, he's got everything you want in terms of the power bat, Again, it's probably not gonna be a 35, 40 home run season from him, but, he's got what it takes to be a 330 home run guy, eventually. So,
Yeah.
not a bad guy to head up your list.
Not bad at all. Not bad at all. So on that note, thank you for listening. We appreciate it. And we're looking to Brandon Day is going to be on with us here probably in the next couple of weeks or so as the holidays roll around. So please give us a 5-star review, rate us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or listen to the podcast. And if you feel like donating to the Tiger Mind Report for all the extra stuff we do, there's a donate link on the description. Every bit goes towards travel expenses and all that jazz, and giving some extra money, giving some money to the writers too. So a lot of these guys do it voluntarily. Jerry refuses money, but it's crazy. But I will, we still pay him anyway. But whatever we can. So please, just the reason why we plug these things, the reason why we read sponsorships is because this is a volunteer thing. And if you just want to join our Patreon too, there's the extra content. I admit I got to put some more on there, but anybody in there, I appreciate everybody who's donating to the Patreon or donates to us at all, period. Again, a shout out to all the parents that I spoke to over the last couple of months of the season that really made it worthwhile. And we're hopefully going to go out there this year for all the opening days. Although I did find out, Chris, that during Erie's opening day is the eclipse. There's a full eclipse.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
So hotels are going to be booked out or again booked out now.
Oh, geez.
Yeah. So
just to sleep at the park.
Yeah. I mean,
sleep in the press box.
Yeah. Just sleep on the deck. Yes. Sleep there or sleep in whatever what you call it? One of the suites,
Yeah.
I don't
know if they would. I don't know if UPMC would approve that, but
yeah, it's
crazy. Do what
crazy.
you got to do.
Yeah. So
yeah, and then we'll probably have the speed list next.
Yes, and then we'll be going on pitchers too. There's also I have finished the best 4 games of the minor league season. I just need to post it. Been admittedly a little bit busy, but they'll be up on the site too as well. So there's plenty of content. Go to TigersMLReports.com. I have to update it too. I hate WordPress, but that's another story for another day. So for myself and Chris, and yeah, like I said, Brandon Day will be joining us here periodically more often than not. So I'm looking forward to working with Brandon and some of his pitching breakdowns. The guy knows his stuff. And he's the conductor of the Matt Manning train. Now he's doing another train. I don't know who's he
running a different train.
Yeah, he's running. He's running a different train now among the prospects. So, but yeah, well, we're looking forward to having Brandon on here more often. So we'll talk to you next time. Have a great night, everybody. or whenever you're listening to this.